Hi everybody, welcome to today's video. We are going to be talking about working conditions and child labor during the Industrial Revolution. So this video corresponds with notes 3.2, and our learning objectives are to describe working conditions of the Industrial Revolution, including child labor, and draw a connection between the conditions of the Industrial Revolution and what's going on now in the developing world. So, first, some facts, some context about child labor. Children during this time period, as young as 6, worked 12 to 14 hours a day. And where they're working could have been the coal mines, it could have been in the textile or clothing factories, but they were really, really involved in working during this industrial revolution. During their shift, they would have been given few breaks and they would have worked 7 days a week, right? So think about, 14 hours a day, 7 days a week. That is much, 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 much more than we work even as adults today. So definitely not ideal. And 6 years old is very, very young. Oftentimes, though, children would have been like 8, but some factories did employ children as young as 6. Some other facts about child labor, we need to think about why children, right? What was it about children that was appealing to factory owners? One, they were smaller, right? As a child, you are a smaller person than an adult. As a result, you can fit into small spaces that adults can't. You have tinier fingers, tinier feet, tinier bodies. So you can get in between machines. You can work more intricate things more than adults. And as a result, children are going to operate heavy and dangerous equipment. And there were no regulations on, who could work and how long. And these machines, this equipment that we're seeing was very, very dangerous, right? Yes, children could fit themselves into smaller spaces, but that also meant that they were more likely to lose fingers and limbs and get crushed by that machinery. Those were pretty common injuries, unfortunately, during this time period. Children were also cheaper in terms of pay. So they could be paid a fraction of adult pay. And part of the reason for that is, right, children don't really know how to speak up for themselves. They don't know how to advocate for themselves versus adults. So factory managers and owners could kind of take advantage of children a little bit more, so far as to see that orphans were often paid nothing at all, right? There were no adults in their lives to try and negotiate pay. So often orphans were put to work for free. And third, in terms of our question of why were children used during this time period, parents often had no choice. During this time, as we're seeing a move from rural to urban life, things are expensive. The cost of living is increasing, and parents need the money. So children are going to leave the home for the first time looking for work. Many children are also going to work instead of going to school as well. So, school back then was not really a mandated thing like it is today, and many children chose to, waive an education and instead go to work. Now, working conditions during this time period were terrible, both for adults and children. You can see here in the images, these are, accidents or victims of the working conditions of the Industrial Revolution. Now, if you arrived late or if you worked too slow, you would have been physically punished for that. Even children, even those little 6 year olds, and your wages would be cut as well. So you're making hardly anything, and they would cut your wages even if you arrived like 5 minutes late. Many children during this time are going to become physically deformed. Their bones are going to actually bow or be bent due to working with the heavy machinery. And as you're developing, right, as you age, your bones are actually pretty soft, and they can become deformed and bent, like I said, because they were crouching to deal with that heavy machinery. The working conditions were extremely dangerous. Factories did not have regulations or codes that they had to follow like they do now. So it was pretty much a free for all there. And we'll take a look at some of these examples tomorrow. There were also a lot of health issues. So, children and adults, we see a rise in asthma. And lung issues and breathing problems as a result of the conditions in the factories. Mill fever, when people started working in the mills and in these factories, they would develop literally a fever and breathing problems. And same thing with cotton lung. So you were getting sick quite a bit as you were working as well due to all of the pollutants in the air. Adults and children were usually given only one meal a workday, and it was often pretty gross as well. It was like, the fat of of bacon and some hot milk. Like it wasn't nutritious. It was pretty bad for you, and they were only given one meal for that 14-hour workday. And then pay was also bad as well. Often, children were paid less than 10 cents per hour. And remember, if you arrived late, your wages would be cut. So I just wanted to show you guys an example of what I'm talking about here. This is the view from a coal company during this time period. And the dust, you can see, like, I know this is a pretty bad picture from the age, but this is all dust in the air that the children are breathing in, the workers are breathing in, right? It's hard to see. It's all cloudy and there's not a whole lot of lighting. The dust is going to get into the boys' lungs, not like I said, could make you sick. And then you see these guys here, they're holding like sticks essentially, and they would use these to hit or kick the boys into working maybe faster, or if they were slacking off, kicking them into obedience. So definitely not ideal working conditions. And you can see that children were also made to work at night. So children were on the night shift going to work at 6 p.m. on a cold, dark day in December, and they would work a 12-hour shift. So when they would get home, then they were all drenched and heavy or sorry, they were drenched by the rain. It's winter time, right? So children, as we know now, should not be subjected to these conditions, but during this time period, they were. Now, obviously, this led to some pretty big issues, and we saw some demands for change, and we call these reforms. So, there were a couple of reforms to child labor to try and fix this problem and the conditions of children in factories. In Britain, we see the Factory Act of 1833. This is going to limit the number of hours that children can work. So, it's going to shorten that shift. It raises the age that a child can be to work to 9, right? Still not great, but it's definitely not 6. So children have to be at least 9 years old to work. And now there is a mandate that children must attend school at least 2 hours a day. Now, as we will kind of see, this wasn't the most effective in fixing or solving the problems of child labor, but now we are seeing at least efforts to make change. And in the US, we see the development of the US Children's Bureau in 1912, and this is going to make it the government's responsibility to monitor child labor versus the factory itself. Now, there is still child labor today. Some estimates say that 211 million children between the ages of 5 and 14 do work today. That's 18% of all the children in the world. And child workers are mostly concentrated in Africa and Asia. So if you guys have ever heard of the term like sweatshop, that is child labor, right? So think about where you like look at tags on things that you own, right? Where are they made? Sometimes they are going to be made by sweatshops and children who are working on those products. So you can see this is one of those establishments in Asia. You can see these are child workers working on sewing machines, making clothing. And here as well, this is another example. And you can see the others were in a factory setting or even agricultural labor, but that is all the same, right? Children working at a very, very young age for little pay. So remember, our learning objectives were to describe working conditions of the Industrial Revolution, including child labor, and draw a connection between the conditions of the Industrial Revolution and what's going on now in the developing world. So make sure to answer the questions, go back if you need to, and fill anything in, and ask me questions as you are seeing me in class. Talk to you guys soon.